anything that you know came up for you today. So, opening the floor for Q&A. Okay, I'll start. So a question I have is, you know, how we think about Tier 1 foundational skills. A lot of folks come in it thinking that we have to stay whole group. And I'm just curious about your decision to have a differentiated model and how maybe you worked through some of those fears and made that decision to make that program decision for Seaford District.
Can you repeat the question, whoever's going to answer?
They're asking about why do they have small group phonics instruction? But I actually, Devika, I don't think of DI as Tier 1. So I'm give me 2 minutes to make the case. So the Tier 1 foundational skills instruction in bookworms, if you saw word study today, that's the Tier 1 foundational skills instruction. Everybody gets the same, right? DI is a multiple entry foundational skills curriculum. It was designed to be MTSS. So MTS, just because everybody gets something, doesn't mean it's Tier 1.
Right.
Because it's a multiple entry skills curriculum based on diagnostic data. So that's how I think of it. Everyone gets it, and I've worked really hard with the Delaware DOE to make sure that the legislation never said that Tier 2 instruction has to give extra time only to kids who are below the standards. That everybody who gets off a yellow school bus deserves to get some instruction specifically designed to meet their needs. So for me, DI is not Tier 1. I don't know how you guys think of it.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that we think of DI as more Tier 2 instruction,
Yeah.
and then we sometimes do a 2.5, where we're doing some additional supports for students, such as double dosing them or accelerating their groupings by doing 2 lessons in a day, or by giving them 2 opportunities with a teacher to do the same lesson. So just depending on what that student's needs are.
Sharon mentioned before that one of your first experiences with the dial was all these kindergartners came in as 0, and were they all special ed? And when you have students who have never known that this is the color red, or this is a B and it says B, then they're at a 0 simply because they didn't know, right? And the rate in which they are exposed to that letter or sound or word or whatever you're giving them, you're going to pick it up at different rates. And then you're also going to have kindergartners that came in already knowing all of that, right? When you're 5, in kindergarten and first grade, the levels are so different. But if I'm a kindergartner and I came already knowing all my letters and sounds, and I can read some decodable text, I'm going to be bored to tears spending a week learning that B says B. If I am a first grader and I can read, it just came naturally to me, or I spent a lot of time reading books, and I was privileged to be able to pick up so quickly on reading. Why do I want to sit there reading The Fat Cat Sat on the Mat with a bat and a rat? That's not that's boring to me. At the same time, if I'm a first grader and I'm still learning to decode, or I'm still working on my alphabet for whatever reason, it didn't come so quickly and so easily for me, sitting there every day struggling through long vowels when I haven't yet learned my alphabet, or I haven't learned to decode, that's also not fun, right?
Yes.
There are things in place for me during shared reading, like all of my friends are going to choral read this, so even if I don't know the word, I can jump in with my choral drag along. But there's going to be that spot for me in that day that I'm going to get what I need, whether it be something more challenging than what this standard or this continuum says I should be doing because I'm 6.5 years old, or whether it be, you know, it says I should have already mastered this but I haven't. It gives that wiggle room to develop where they're at during that part of the day. So that kind of speaks a little bit to, you know, that phonics continuum can be a little bit of push and pull, especially with our littlest learners.
So I have a question, and I'm going to facilitate the jump in. So if you wouldn't mind going back, before Seaford was doing well, academically, I believe, Kelly, you wrote about this in an article in the 74, one of the lowest in the state, almost taken over by the state because things were so bad. At some point, the decision was made to get up and try something. What were the first few decisions you made in trying to change things? Was it we're going to do professional development? Was it we're going to have, I don't know. What is the first few things that you all did to start the process of turning things around? Can you go back to that in your mind and tell us about it?
Yes, at that time, we had a really fantastic group of leaders at our district office. And they determined that we were gonna start our partnership with the University of Delaware and Dr. Walpole and her team. And we started with professional learning, primarily with small group instruction, so that students would get exactly what they needed during the small group time. And we started with our reading specialists, and they were trained on the differentiated instruction block. And then when they started to see results, more people wanted it, because success breeds success. And when they saw students that they believed couldn't or hadn't been successful before, and they started to become successful and advance through the skills, then other people said, well, what's that? Oh, that works. What else can we do? And so then Dr. Walpole joined us again and said, hey, we can read a novel. We can read real books with kids. And she started showing us and all of the teachers, leaders, teachers, everybody got in the room and got to hear the message, and they were invited to try. And that's really how we started. We started with people who were willing, and we started to build success. And then it just grew and grew from there. And then, you know, we had to drag people along. Right? Am I accurate?
If I could speak to the prequel of that, I would say before all of that took place, it was strategic hires. So getting the right
That's so true.
leadership in place and individuals to buy in to what the vision was of the district. So from the leadership, from the board, superintendent's office, the directors, and then the educators. Well, building administrators and then the educators.
Thank
And
you
so-
for saying that.
So once that happened, and you got the buy-in, and as she said, you had individuals that may have kicked against the brick, but also either they left or they jumped on board and started to see the success. One of the things that I love to see was individuals that either worked at DOE or worked at other school districts literally wanted to be a part of what we were doing. So I would say prior to everything that she said, it was the hires and the strategic hires that we had to make the district click.
Other questions? Go ahead.
I want to dig into that a little bit more, because part of my ed leadership work also is around leaders and boards. And I've been able to sit in board meetings where there's been a lot of conflict. How could you get on the same page to even know what to look for and agree on who to actually hire?
So, my name is Jeff Benson, by the way. I am the vice president of our school board, and I I am alumni. I'm a graduate of Seaford School District. So since I've been on the board, except for one person, but he might as well have been Seaford because he worked for the district for a number of years and retired. I've been on the board surrounded by Seaford alumni. So the number one goal for the board, we all had the same passion and mission. No ego. It was about how do we make this district thrive. And the worst of the worst, because like they said, we was almost taken over by the state. So that was number one. The next thing was hiring the right superintendent. And so to do Mr. Parrington's credit, he rallied the troops, and he was very strategic in who we hired. And like many of you who is in education, you know who's who throughout, your work environments. And so I'm guessing he went on a recruiting spree to say this person knows how to do this person is great at doing this, and we brought all those pieces of the puzzle together. And then they went to work day to day in the midst of it. I can tell you this, at the board level, and Ms. Hopkins, she's our board president, from day one for us, strategically, it was always about, okay, now that we have this superstar team, how do we set up succession if someone leaves, God forbid they pass away, whatever the case may be. The blessing for us was majority of them stayed for at least 5 years before we started to see the transitions and other opportunities come their way. The great thing about it is you have a great superstar team. What hurts is they are so good, eventually it's time for them to move on so they can get what they need to get for themselves professionally. And so slowly but surely you see that transition, but we already have the succession set up. We have the nucleus set up, so when individuals leave, we can kind of plug and play. And we're already right now grooming building administrators. So if you're a dean of students, making sure you get the credential that you need or whatever so you can move into the assistant principal level and then vice versa. And then all the way up to district office. So it's a strategic move across the board. Kim, if you want to add anything.
To piggyback off of Dr. Benson, it really is. We communicate a lot. Communication is definitely key. And our leadership is very transparent about people, their skill sets, and things like that. So it's almost like chess, speaking of the succession plan, well, what's next? If this person moves here, is the next person certified in what they have to be certified in to take on that role? Because it would be great if they apply, because that is their strength. But then we always have to ponder, but do they even want that job?
Right.
Because we're like literally thinking, like with Ms. Phillips, like we were like, oh man, she would be a really good principal. Does she even want it? But she would have to apply for it, But we were thinking about that even before she even thought to apply, because that's just how we have done things.
Yeah.
We are all alumni that sit on the board. Even when we look at how our board is made up, we have an educator of over 28 years.
Yeah.
We have Dr. Benson. He's a businessman in the community. We have a person that was in the military, retired from there, but also substituted at our schools with our littles. Then you have another board member that graduated from Seaford, was heavily into sports, very connected in the community. And then you have myself that also graduated, taught nursing at the local community college for years, but also had 3 children go through the district. So my mindset is we can't fail, because we're failing not only my own children, but we're failing all children. So when we think about Mr. Parrington, he coined success for all students. And he meant that. And we started as a community seeing it on side of the police car, and start seeing it on decal, and start seeing it multiple places. But the thought process is we can't fail. So do we always have to agree? No, that's a beautiful thing about having people with different backgrounds. But the same goal, the outcome is that everyone, all of our children have to be successful. So we can all agree on that. So we figure out, compromise. And then when we get done compromising, we come back into, public, and this is what we're going to do. But we do trust each other.
I think it's
Um,
that success, same way success breeds success,
Absolutely.
trust breeds trust,
It
right?
is.
So I came into a position where, I mean, I trust these folks, and I trust them to tell me when I'm doing the right things, and I trust them when they say, hey Sharon, there's a problem with this in the community, we need you to address it, and I can ask for advice. Well, I'm not from Seaford, so tell me about, like, what are the underlying pieces here? I mean, I've worked here for 10 years, this is my home, but I'm not from Seaford, and that's a big deal. We were talking about that, about, you know, in Delaware, where you're from, who are your people, who are you, right? And so I think I'm one of the luckiest superintendents in Delaware because we have a school board where we are all on the same page. And I know that when we're discussing a topic, as long as I've got data and I've got folks that are endorsing it and I've done my homework and I know I can give solid reasons for why we need to do something, they're like, have at it, right? And at the same time, if they're saying, Sharon, we need to have a connection, like we had our board meeting, was that last night?
But
Yes,
last
yes.
night.
It was last night. It's been a long week already, it's only Wednesday. One of the board members asked about the connection between our priorities and goals and how the board could support us. And I thought, is there another school board in Delaware that's asking that question? So we just brainstormed, kind of moving forward, we're gonna reference our priorities and goals when we have a presentation to the board, so that the board can see how it connects with the work and provide input and ideas, because they're super smart and helpful, so.
So just so you all know, Principal Phillips, who's over here, she's on the panel too. She's kind of off the side of the cut. But just so y'all know, she is available for questions. I'm just saying, all love. Anyone else? Somebody else has a question?
Can I add one thing about what you were talking about, trust? Because the trust that the school board had in that time when we first started, back in 2014, when we were at the bottom, the school board president, and I've never heard of this, went with the superintendent to a meeting up at the Department of Education when we got our results, to sit and hear alongside. They were very united, and I think that kind of trust, that vulnerability, is what really laid the foundation for a lot of the success that we have in Seaford.
Thank you. Go ahead. You got a question?
Yes, thank you all for having us today. Since the first classroom that I visited, I think I was on board with what you all are proposing, because the issue is not new to those of us who serve Black and brown Indigenous students in our community. I think the piece or the gap that I've been wrestling with all day is, if we are not in a position where we're ready for a full curriculum rehaul, what are the opportunities or steps that we have to turnkey the strategies, some of the things that you guys are doing with fluency and phonics, to provide opportunities and development for our teachers beginning Tuesday, beginning Wednesday. So I'd love to hear opportunities of how you turnkey this if you're not quite ready to dive fully into bookworms. Because my teachers will literally kill me if I go back and tell them I'm gonna change the curriculum right now.
Yes.
Open to your responses.
You wanna answer?
I'm thinking, I'm processing, because that's a lot.
Well, before you answer, did anyone here listen to that podcast on Ed Trust about Seaford? When they started, do you remember where they were in the curriculum adoption process? The reflections of the chief academic officer at the time? They had just adopted something.
Oh, right, something different, yeah.
They had just adopted something else, and here's the new guy
We
saying,
did.
we're gonna change
We
again the same
Yes,
thing.
we had.
just adopted treasures.
Yes. I
We
did.
had open court,
Uh-huh.
then we had adopted treasures, and we had teams of teachers, because I was there then too. We had teams of teachers and district specialists writing and doing scope and sequence work and doing all this stuff, and then we came in, and the very next year, everything turned around. But we did start with the differentiated instruction block.
That's what I was gonna say, yeah.
I think it's an accessible gateway.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost, the book costs $28, so it's not something that you can't afford. So doing a book study with that book and saying, anybody care to try? That's a step that feels manageable to teachers. Because I do book studies all around the country. I have one tomorrow night. Yeah, on that. And it's been a really positive thing because it doesn't feel too overwhelming.
So I would add to that, as a building administrator, if you went that approach and did something like that, I would think about the materials for your teachers. So one of the things that Nicole and I tried really hard, and I know other schools in the district did as well, was how do we, if we're going to implement the DI block, there's lots of cards, scripts, things, right? And so how do we make that for our teachers so that that's not a barrier to them trying it?
Another thing, anybody here could do choral and repeated reading.
With
We
any
saw it,
text.
right? With any text,
That's right.
as a regular routine.
I'm just gonna throw this out there too, if you are struggling with secondary literacy, because I know that's a big struggle in my district, cracking the Common Core is another easy way to get strategies and do a book study, similar kind of process, to then, whatever resource you're using, you can start changing the routines.
From a teacher's perspective, starting with the DI block, it's easy to get those quick wins. Because when you think, and it kind of goes a little bit back to the phonics instruction too, when you think about a general scope and sequence, a first grader might spend 9 weeks in short vowels, and then you go to blends and diagraphs and our control and you move on. When you're doing the DI block and you're differentiating that phonics instruction, you can start getting them through them quicker. And so they run in about a 3-week cycle. Some of them are longer with 6 weeks. But when you start seeing kids make progress every 3 weeks, those are quick wins to celebrate. And even, if you have some hesitant teachers to buy into that different way of teaching that systematic phonics, it's easy to get the quick win and the quick buy-in with them.
Other questions?
I was just gonna add on to what
And if you
Dr.
don't mind just saying your name and where you're from, that'd be helpful.
Sorry about that. Tari Parsonen, Buffalo, Western New York Education Alliance. I was just gonna add on to, in addition to what Dr. Walpole said about being able to use her book right away and doing differentiated things in the classroom, that we have a professional learning group in Buffalo called Western New York Lit, and we had a teacher, you probably know her, Dr. Walpole, Kathleen Lysick, who presented using her book and gave educators that evening. We gave away lots of her books, and they all worked through it about what they could implement in the classroom the very next day using that book. So we don't have any districts in our region using bookworms, but they're all using her book.
Anyone else? Quick question, if you could put on your time machine hat, when the results were low in the district, and lowest in the state, what did people attribute it to? Was there, I'm just curious, what was the, why did they think that was? I mean, what was the prevailing ethos about why the kids were struggling the way they were, and why the system was struggling the way it was? Anyone?
Ms. Phillips.
Yeah.
You go.
People thought, the community thought it was teachers. So it goes back to what Dr. Benson said about getting the right people. Well, Dr. P getting the right people on the bus. And that was his point, if you don't wanna get on the bus, you gotta go. So, another part of the community blamed the kids, those kids. They can't learn, they won't learn. So it was different opinions about it. Our society has downplayed, I feel like, the role of teachers, until COVID came, right? And then they realized, you want them out of here, get them to the teacher. But it was a little bit of both, like getting the right people on the bus as far as teaching, and the people that wanted to be there and wanted to work with our kids, had a passion for teaching, not just showing up to a job. That's a big part of who was coming into your building. And as Mr. Benson said, those people who weren't there for that soon left. It didn't take them long to realize, if I'm near retirement, I'm out, I'm going, closer to my home district. Those people left. So a lot of it was that, and then those kids. They looked at our population like they can't learn. You guys have those kids.
So, I was hired by the district in 2015. So, I remember being offered the position of Director of Special Education. I was so excited, right? I'd spent 20 years in special ed, and I was delighted. Each district only has one special ed director. And I called a person who I thought of as a mentor, and it still breaks my heart. And he said, "Oh, why don't we do that down there?" And I thought, how dare you, right? Like, these are kids in a community like anybody else's. And all I could think was that I have a skill set that I can bring, and that attitude of like, that Seaford didn't deserve it, or it was bad, or it was heartbreaking. And it made me angry, and then I was so delighted when I first came to Seaford, and I walked into my first meeting, and I felt like I'd come home. And I didn't understand how people could think that way.
I was gonna add, I think there was, for those of us who were here, I think there was some anger, and I felt very defensive of the district, as Dr. DiGirolamo said. I was like, wait a minute. And so then I think we all kicked into competitiveness at a certain point, right? And then we all wanted to be better, and I can remember us just trying to be better than the school district next to us. And if we could just be better than them, then we would be okay. And then we just kept, as our teachers grew and as we got bookworms and as we got the right people on the bus and the right seats, and it just kind of is this snowball effect. And I think that's how I think about school reform efforts. It's that snowball. So if you can get the snowball going down, and then it just keeps gathering more momentum and going. And I think that's what happened for us in Seaford, is we had a bunch of really committed people who felt very passionately about our students.
I think this room can relate to that. There are a lot of folks here in different systems who have heard those kids.
Right.
Right, whether it's Brooklyn or Savannah Chatham or Baltimore or Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Oakland. That's why they're here.
Yep.
Because we have, and the interesting is that's a lot of different places, but it just so happens that those kids are everywhere.
Right.
Just so happens. So at a certain point in time, the question is, well, what did you do with those kids? And it sounds like, well, let me ask you this. If you could give them one thing, if you could say, hey, whatever you take away from this, make sure you do X. I'm gonna give you a second to think about it, but I want you to be able to, is that all right? Can they answer? Just make sure you write this one thing down. I gave them a list of questions I asked and asked them a question. Forget them. So I'm just gonna ask you, what's the one thing you would make sure they take from this when they leave? From wherever you sit, whether it's board or superintendent, wherever you research, whatever. Anyone want to start off? Go ahead, bro.
I can start. When I came, to the board, I didn't have any education background at all. All I knew was I was a community guy. I knew nonprofit. I knew business, and I knew how to bring people together. And so one of the things that I did as a board member was entrench myself into education. As far as serving on additional task force within the state, being a part of our legislative committee for the district to be able to advocate on the behalf of not just Seaford, but the state of Delaware's education, connecting with the governor's office and just other educators to be able to collect the dots, to connect the dots. So I could be strategic to help my district in the midst of it. And I think having the diversity that we have within our board, not just color-wise, but also professional background, I think that those things help propel the district because in the beginning, it wasn't pretty. Like, you guys are seeing the success, right? So it wasn't pretty at all. But at the same regard, if Dr. D has, we had a situation where we had a community member that wants to do some things or whatever. Dr. D, she can call one of us and say, hey, do you have the contact to this or whatever, so we can make sure that this is taken care of for this person. We probably all have direct contact to our Secretary of Education, like on a first name basis, cell phone, or whatever the case may be. Delaware's small enough to do that. You may not be able to do that in your states, but Delaware, you're connected to your local politicians, to your state representatives, to your state senators, and congressional delegation. We can call them and they'll come to us, or whatever the case may be. So for me, as a board member, I got entrenched to learn what education was in the midst of it, and then made myself educated with going to school myself. You know what I mean? So as you know, I'm mentoring, like I would mentor into the schools. On Wednesdays, I'll mentor our young men in the middle school and high schools. And so as they're talking about the struggles they're having with homework, I tell them, hey, I got homework too. You know what I mean? Because I wanted to make myself better by being a part of the system, the ecosystem, but also being a better board member for our educators in the community.
So that's board development is one
Yes.
thing.
Oh, and yes, as well as going to
too.
NSBA.
Yeah.
So going to the National School Board Association meetings to get that professional development. The state has its own professional development, so I was a part of all those things. School finance is a big thing to learn that most of us don't understand. So educating myself on those things, so I made myself entrenched in what our educators, our directors, and what they were doing, so I could be a better board member.
Thank you. Next, someone else? One thing you want to make sure, go ahead.
So, I'm Kimberly Hopkins, President of Seaford Board of Education. My one takeaway for all of you is success for all students. When I joined the board in 2016, that was during a time that Seaford was looking at, I call it reconfiguration. We had a balanced school calendar at Central, and then you had K through 5 at the other elementary schools. So in 2015, they started talking about reabsorbing Central into the collective, because I was looking at it almost like a choice school. And people were angry in the community because the kids at Central were the best and brightest. How can we bring them back into the other elementary schools? So at that time, they started housing. Y'all remember all this going on?
Oh, yes, we do.
They started holding town hall meetings. They were going to the different schools in the community. And I started going to those meetings as well because honestly, I was offended. I was so offended because when I went through the system in Seaford from K through 12, Central was literally the only school I did not attend because West Seaford or Central were your two options for 1 through 3rd. So I remember sitting in the audience listening to the people really like, this is your community, but the stuff that you're saying doesn't reflect that you care about it, right? And I just remember saying that myself, I have a master's degree in nursing education, and when I finished my doctorate, it'd be an EDD. And then I had another colleague of mine that also taught at the community college with me, that also holds a master in nursing education. And then we had Dr. Wright, who also was a graduate of Seaford that was teaching in the district. And how dare you say that it's not possible for kids to go to the other schools and do well. So I was so offended that I ran for the board. Because of my 3 children, none of them were at Central. And they all were still bright, they all were still capable, and I could not believe my ears that they couldn't be capable because they didn't attend this other school. So that was, you need to have adults that are passionate.
Yeah.
Adults that, and not just any old adults, the ones that will actually speak the truth, and the adults that people actually will listen to. I used to think that, I would tell my students that I never made a friend advocating for anyone, and I stand on that. You know, I stand on that, and you're gonna make, people upset, but you have to stand on that truth. So get passionate people that people will listen to, and fight for the kids. Cause I really, when they start talking about, this wouldn't be possible, I was offended. And I went to multiple town hall meetings, and then I started going to board meetings, and I kid you not, I had never been to one. I had lived, we were talking to our colleagues from New York, our colleagues. When we were in school, everybody wanted to come to Seaford. Everybody wanted a choice. When choice came out, wanted to come to our schools. Our hallways were overcrowded. It was wild. Then I went to school. Jeff went to the military, and while we were gone, I don't know what happened, but then we came back. We came back home, and that's what drives us, honestly.
Yeah.
That's what drives us through this rebuilding of our district, seeing it go from where it was to seeing our educators going out of the state to get educated, not thinking that it wasn't possible. And I believe that the most effective teachers are the ones that are teachable. And these guys, they went and spent time away from their families to go get these gems, these tools to bring back and implement. That is not easy, because once they had the tools, guess what? These educators of multiple years are now being supervised, and you're going into their classrooms to see the implementation process. That, if I was an educator for a long, well, I am, but, for a long time, now you have someone coming in and checking on you as if you just are starting out, So kudos to our educators. Kudos to our district office. And also, as a board, us working together to make sure that they have what they need. I mean, when you bring different ideas, and I point to Kelly, because she was with us until last year in the thick of it, bring ideas, and they would present different programs that they would want to use. And we would ask questions, and if they didn't have the answer, what would you always say? I'm not sure, but I'll find out.
That's right.
We'll get back to
Always.
you. And they would. So I think, like Dr. D said, being able to show us the data, being able to show us that it's possible, having that trusting relationship. We communicate all the time. It's not a once-a-month thing with us.
Okay.
We're always collaborating.
Thank you. So since I'm sorry, do you have anything? Well, since you mentioned Kelly, why don't we turn over to you? If you could provide one thing to them, guidance, advice. You tell them your name, your former role in Seaford, and then what would your advice be?
Can I go in between, because I really want to piggyback off
Okay,
of
well
what-
then say, you tell them your name and your role.
Chandra, you
And
do
then,
it.
All right, I'm Chandra Phillips. I'm the proud principal of Seaford Central Elementary. An alumni of
That's it, yeah.
Seaford. I wanted to speak to a couple things that Ms. Hopkins said, and the first thing was about this whole Central thing, like Central has those kids. And on the flip side of that, us who worked at Central, we took it as not offensive, but we took it as a challenge. Change up our school. We don't care who you send us. We're gonna get the same results.
That's right.
Because it's about the culture and it's about relationship. And that's what happened. They changed us up. We had those people who were looking like, you work at that school. You have those kids. Okay, well, go ahead, switch it up. We're gonna bring the same results because we care about kids.
Right.
So the second point that I wanted to speak to for Ms. Hopkins was the passion. Like I stated before, getting the right people in your school. Because those of you who came to my school today, I mean, I can take credit for a little bit of that, but you saw the people on the ground doing the work, and they're passionate about that work. They want to work for those kids, right? They're not running away, people that want to be there. And so when we reorganized, like I said, as administrators, we had to toe the line and say, I'm not sure this is what you want to do. You might want to
Yes, we
try
did.
something. There's ways to say that, right? You counsel people out of the profession, and I know, like, we had one teacher when we first reorganized. I was the assistant principal at the time. My principal and myself, we went into the classroom like at Labor Day break, because there was a requirement for things to be on the wall. And so we went through the classrooms, and this particular room didn't have it. So when she came back, you know, we addressed it, and she said, y'all can't come in my room. First of all, it's not your room. But needless to say, she didn't even really start the year. Once that happened, I mean, Labor Day is like a few days into the school year. But once we came to her and was like, well, first of all, it's not your room, and here's what is expected, and she retired in like a week. And we were kind of like, yeah, that's what we need. So let's get someone in here who is here for the kids, who's not thinking about, you know, running to the next district for pay increases, because that's also a thing. So we know that the people who are in Seaford, they want to be there because they could go, 10 or 12 miles to the east and probably make $10,000 more a year. It's just that simple. So if they're there, they want to be there. Like my tagline this year was, you chose to work here. So when things get a little rough, one of my teachers actually made me a shirt that said, you chose to work here, Miss Phillips. I wear it so when things get tough, or you know, when that one kid is cutting up and you're like, I'm like, you chose to work here. So that's really the culture, you know, the building is getting the right passionate people in there to work for kids.
Can I chime in? I'm Chrissy Jeanette.
What's your role, Chrissy?
I used to be the principal at Blades. Now I'm currently the director of instruction. I want to piggyback on something that Chandra said. We've really focused a lot in the district about relationships matter, and we spent a lot of time talking about we need to know our kids, but not to know them to say bless their heart, right? But to know them so that we can maintain that passion and hold them to high expectations. And so it's really built off of those relationships, but also maintaining those really high expectations that you see evident in all of our classrooms.
That's perfect timing for me to say hello. I'm Kelly Carbajal Hagman. I was the director of instruction in Seaford for quite some time. And I think that the most powerful thing that we did was believe. We believed in that the students could do hard things. And we believed that the teachers could teach all children. And we believed that our administrators would step up and be the leaders that they needed to be to guide and lead and promote the needs of the students and the community. So those are the things that I really think of that made it special, and we had the right group of people, as people on this panel have already said. But it truly was the belief that we could that was the driving factor that got us to success for all students. And we meant it. We truly, truly meant it. And when we fell down, or when the data didn't show us what we wanted it to show, we found a way. And we were unrelentless, and we chased it. All students, success for all students.
When you say you believed that the kids could do it, I hear you.
Yep.
And so because you believed in students, therefore you did what? Therefore you approached it how? How does that show up in the work itself, that belief?
I hear what you're saying, because it's so easy. I mean, it's almost like you want to sing, "We believe," right?
And to what degree did the curriculum early work affect beliefs? Like,
True. Like, so as I said, success breeds success. So you can develop belief in people. There were people who did not believe at first. But if you start with people who believe, you find the people who are willing, then those other people around them cannot deny it. And you see that they're having success with those very same students that struggled in other places.
And I think there's also a piece there of like, you're gonna have folks, well, okay, you don't have to believe in it, but you're gonna do it.
You get to
And
that.
then you're gonna see the results, and then you can believe. So you don't necessarily have to believe in it first. But it is helpful to have some of those early adopters and some of that evidence that it can work. Because, you know, you're not then just fighting against folks that just don't wanna do the new thing.
Thank you for mentioning that, because we didn't try to change anybody's mind. We didn't spend any time, we didn't try to change anyone's mind. We only changed their behavior.
Yes.
And when I said that we believed, that's because the leadership, the core, right? The core people believed that it could happen, so we drove for those results. And then, like Chrissy said, the snowball effect, more people started to believe, like it, because they saw the results.
And on an intellectual way, even if you didn't believe that it could work, you knew that you needed to do something different, right? Like, we didn't want to be last, so we knew we needed to do something different. And so it's like, well, we can't get any worse than we are right now, so let's try this new thing, and if it works, yay. And so then you start building
This is one of
momentum.
the key, so it's very, very important, and I'll come to you, I know you have your hand up, I don't know if anybody else did, and there's someone there. So, really quickly, if you look at the book Driven by Data, and then Leverage Leadership by Paul Bradford Santoyo, we use it in New Lead. I used to be the executive director of Western Region for New Leaders from the schools. And within that data-driven instruction framework, what he says is, you do not try to change beliefs, you change practice. And when the results come, then there's dissonance they gotta wrestle with.
That's right.
Well, why did that happen? Now the beliefs can begin to change. But what a lot of system leaders and community advocates, where they go wrong is, they spend all their time circulating the beliefs. So we're talking about prejudice and racism and classism and this and that and your belief in all kids and all that stuff. And by the time you finish arguing with that, they're gone, you gone, and the initiative done died. The money done ran out. I just need you to, here's a template for the data-driven instruction for this cycle, for this, look at this standard, that they did 2 right on this one, and the same standard this one they missed wrong, what did they get wrong? Well, why did it, so you drill down to the details of practice.
Right.
And then as that grows, then all of a sudden it challenges the belief system. So thank you so much for saying that, so much. Go ahead.
I'm Sandra Galvato Kunzman. I'm Executive Director of Alien Reading for the Rochester City School District, so Rochester, New York, upstate New York. So my question is, from this document here.
Thank you for using it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Brownie points
Even.
to me. So through this journey, and you might have kind of maybe already mentioned it, but through the journey, what did you purposefully avoid through this journey?
We're trying to find out where the landlines are.
I try to avoid making decisions, A, too hastily, and B, without input or stakeholder engagement, right? So I was new to this community. I felt like it felt like home, but it wasn't really. And so I spent the first year as special education director asking questions. Why do we do it that way? And explain to me what the history is, who helped make this decision. And I think it just informed then my practice over the years. And we have much more success collectively when we listen to our stakeholders, we take that input and can make those decisions thoughtfully. I have a friend from high school who is a heart and lung surgeon, and I joke that her job literally is life and death. But if we need to take 3 hours to mull over a decision or engage a committee and defer a decision for a week, it's okay, and it's worth it.
Thank you. Go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, going back to the past where you're at the very bottom. At that point, I can imagine everything is on fire, right? How did you guys keep the priority what the priority is while dealing with all the fires of the day-to-day that we all see as educators?
Right. Good question.
We all had our areas, and I think that
So we really focused on a system of big rocks, And through collaboration, it had to do with our superintendent really helping us identify what the big rocks were going to be. And then it was a lot of collaboration and refusing to work in silos, right? So we were breaking down barriers between our different work groups. For example, I worked at that time when we first started very much with multilingual learners. We were on a Title III improvement plan. We had, not only did we have the lowest scores for, every subgroup, but also for our English learners. And at that time, they were doing a separate curriculum. They were doing pull-out instruction. And I attended the training with Dr. Walpole, and I watched particularly the word study, and my eyes, because that's my background, is language acquisition. My eyes just became opened, literally and figuratively, that it is a language learning curricula, and they are going down to like the word, phoneme, sentence level, and that is what the English learners, because that's what I was always on the hunt for. That was my lens at that time. I needed to get us out of that Title III improvement plan. And that collaboration for what was a Tier 3 and moving them into, they're not going to be taught in closets anymore. And we stopped all pull-out instruction. And that made a big difference. And it made a lot of people unhappy. We worked through a lot.
I'd like to kind of piggyback off what Kelly said. So when she's referring to our big rocks, we had kind of two overarching goals as the district. And as an administrative team, we spent a lot of time in a room kind of hashing that out and what did that look like. And we now have a school improvement process where we don't do a year-long program or year-long plan. We do semester plans. So it's very much, what are you doing this semester that's going to improve student achievement? And then when you look at your mid-year data, what are you doing for the second semester? So it's a living, breathing document. It's not a binder that's on, those of you who have been around for a while, you know what I'm talking about. The binder that's on the shelf that you never look at and you don't know what's in it. I meet with the principals, and Kelly used to meet with the principals monthly. And we talk about what's in your 90-day plan. Where are you in progress with your 90-day plan? How are your students doing with your goals in your 90-day plan? So that's a continual process of student improvement for us.
For those of you who may not be familiar with the big rocks, you got a jar, you got big rocks and little rocks. If you fill it up with the little rocks, which like most of us do, all the things, all the minutia, the day-to-day grind, the emergency, you fill up with that, there's no room left in the jar for the big rocks. But if you fill it up with the big rocks, literacy, right? Big rock. And the other big rocks, then you can put the little stuff in there. You can shake it up and get the other stuff in there too. But if you don't start with the big rocks, you will never get them in. Never get them in. I wanted to come over here. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm Maggie Carrillo. I'm a structured literacy specialist with Albuquerque Public Schools. And so, thank you so much for asking the question, because that was one of the questions I was trying to ask was, how to get to those priorities. But then you also started talking about those 90-day plans, and that's something that in our district we work a lot on, is ensuring that every school has a 90-day plan to help improve student achievement. But when we look at those 90-day plans, we find that the goals are too big, too broad, and the action steps are vague. So what kind of collaboration, professional learning do you all do collectively with leadership to make those 90-day plans actionable goals for the schools to keep moving forward in student achievement? Do they center around like a common assessment, those kinds of things?
So, when we were last in the state, we went into a partnership also with the University of Virginia and their school turnaround program. So, we spent a lot of time together as an administrative team there. So we all were trained on that there. I think one of the things that I'm wrestling with now is as we have new members to our team and as we get new administrators in, how to bring them up to date and up to speed on that. I think one of the beautiful things about Seaford is, I am not gonna cry, Dr. Walpole, is that we're real, right? And so what you see and the passion and the people, we're all real and we all talk to each other in that way. So Chandra and I can have a very real conversation and she will call me out on stuff and I will call her out on stuff. So when we meet together, it's really about, okay, what are the things that you can leverage that are gonna help move your school along? So I don't need a big grandiose plan. As a matter of fact, I've said to principals, I don't need all the figurative language in there, right? Like that doesn't help move your school. Talk to me about what are the two things, what are the two things that you're gonna focus on as a school that are gonna make a difference for your kids?
Today, when we went into the school building, at least at Central, I don't know the other schools, but at Central, the kids were talking in complete sentences. Y'all remember that? Is that an intentional thing? Is that a particular thing the teachers start doing? You know what I'm talking?
It was very intentional. It's called accountable talk. So it's like I like to add or I respectfully disagree. So it's been intentional, yes, to get students talking more.
Wow. Other questions, other folks? Anyone else?
I want to just speak to the big fires, small fires, because of course as a building principal,
You live it every day.
like 1,000 small fires. But early in this, when I first became like an assistant principal with a great principal, I learned so much from her. When we were making this transition to bookworms and focusing on the DI block, it was a non-negotiable. So, like on delays and things like that, it was like you're going to do the DI block. Like if you come to school 2 hours late, it doesn't matter. How do we develop our schedule so that every kid is still getting that that's a word I can't say. Differentiated instruction. So we made it a non-negotiable, and it was a small chunk. So we got all this stuff, but this right here is what you're going to do every day, and then we follow up on it as administrators. So that's one of the things that I'm still continuing to learn is how to take small pieces, focus on that for a period of time, because we all know if you put something in and you don't monitor what gets monitored gets done. So I'm actually working on that. For my growth is like, how do I zero in on the thing and how do we stay with it, knowing that then we can build on that once we get it good. So just kind of focusing, which is going back to the big rocks, focusing on that big thing and monitoring it and making it a non-negotiable.
I'm David, the director of program with Fulcrum. I'm curious about how did you build that instructional lens for your coaches and your principals and assistant principals in order to coach DI, in order to coach structured literacy practices? I'm just curious how you built that knowledge.
Well, I'll speak for myself. We attended every training. That teachers had to go to. The administrators were there from the beginning. So we can't go into a classroom and provide feedback if you have no idea what you're doing. We also taught lessons whenever Dr. Walpole would come or our coaches would come. Like, we're in all of that. Being a part of it. It's not just here's what we're gonna do, go do it. It's like I'm in this with you. I'm in the trenches with you. And if a teacher is not available or we have a sub that's not up to par, which about, myself or my assistant principal, we'll slide into the room. And I tell the teachers, I'm not gonna be you because you teach it every day, but the program is set up where I can come in and I'm familiar enough with it that I can come in and do the best job that I can do, and because I'm the principal, the kids kind of hang on every word. So I feel like I've done something, even if I haven't when I walk out of the classroom. But we just get in the trenches with them. It's not here's a PD day and I don't know where my principal is or my assistant principal. I'm sitting right here at the table with you, learning alongside of you.
I can say that from the district office, central office leadership perspective, it was made very clear that it was a non-negotiable that our administrators were engaged in just the manner that Chandra described. And, you know, we had, at that time, we had some school leaders that were trained, you know, had different expectations for their role. And we very quickly made clear what the expectations were. And that was one of our non-negotiables.
Quick question. So we have a variety of roles here, people representing different systems and their roles. We also have a state president for the NAACP in Maryland here. And there are others of us here who have, we wear different advocacy hats with the various organizations, some in the NAACP, some in others. From an advocate, for those of us who are advocates in fighting for civil rights and social justice, is there something we should be advocating for to support this? Is there policy that needs to happen? Is it certain tools? Is it what from an advocacy lens? What supports this kind of work best? What are a couple things that got to happen from a policy perspective? Or maybe it's at the district level, at the board level. Can you give any recommendations at all from a policy perspective or an advocacy perspective? Go ahead, Dr. Walker.
So I think the one is that you're doing right now is getting ready to tell the story. And tell the story in all of its color, you know, not sanitized. This was hard. This is what we did. Here's where I think that sometimes, I know for me, I'm a terrible storyteller.
You're a wonderful professor.
Oh, thank you. but stories change. Stories get people to think. And stories like this one with data and kids in them are going to be really powerful.
Any other recommendations for advocates? Anyone else?
I don't know if this speaks to your question or not, but I feel like the pre-service work that are offered to teachers in college needs to include more diverse classes. Like, they need to be forced, because there's a lot of people out here that don't want to know about other people. Let's just be honest. This is how I grew up. I can go through life this way. I don't need to go here. I don't need to go there. And then there's those of us who have to go here and we have to go there to survive in this world. So teaching those teachers, like giving them more avenues to learn about, I'm not sure, it's been a long time since I've been in college, so this may be happening. It just doesn't look like it with the candidates that we get. Yeah, that they actually know or want to know. So because there are a lot of people who don't want to know, we need to make them know.
And I don't know if this is a policy piece necessarily, but I think always encouraging folks to have honest conversations about race, about poverty, right? Different backgrounds. That makes us richer and more well-informed, and ignoring the lack of knowledge or the differences is not helpful.
Well, it's tricky because in places like Oakland, that's all we do is talk about race. I'm not playing. They'll tell you. We'll have a whole board meeting talking about race till we get so wound up, and they just shut it down. Am I lying? I mean, literally shut it down. Everybody's walk out. We could do that for a whole year and not have any board agenda item covered. So there's I'm serious. The same thing. So there's a healthy balance between talking about some of this stuff, because it's important, and you want to have developed people, and you want to have people who can engage with different communities and all that. And we're gonna get to teaching and learning at some point. The nuts and bolts of instruction.
Right.
If that's not on the table, we could rotate in this sphere forever.
Yeah.
At least in Oakland, that's how it goes. Maybe you guys are more sane. But where I'm from, we can go there. Right, folks? You know, board member, you know, let's tell it like it is. So there's got to be some sort of a balance. We want to develop people's cultural awareness and their cultural competence and all the rest. And guess what? On Monday when I come in your classroom, we on lesson 2.5. You need to be ready to go. Good. Are there other questions? I know we're running out of time, but we can take
Can
one
I
or two
just
more.
say one thing?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Because I want to add on to what Dr. Walpole said. Dr. Walpole spoke about telling the story.
Yeah.
And the data is a really important part of the story that needs to be shared. Because that's where the student outcomes are going to be visible and the learning is going to be visible. And I think that if you were to talk about a policy that, needs to be moved forward, is increased transparency in the outcome data, that the curricula that districts are choosing, that the curricula that states are putting on their green lists, because many times they're not the curricula that have the data to prove their efficacy. And so I think that we need to push legislators to set the tone that we're not going to accept things just because a publishing company says it's good, or because a lot of other people say it's good, or because teachers like it. We have to see the data, because that's what's going to show us that gaps are being closed. Because data that's not just the all student data, but down to every single subgroup.
Well, that story I can tell, and I'm gonna tell you tomorrow.
And this is, okay, cool.
I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna show you the subgroup data.
Well, I will say this before we go, because we gotta wrap up, because we got a bus driver and all that kind of stuff. But most people, not just in this room, but across the country, when they pick a curriculum, they never, ever really examine student achievement results. Never. I have talked to publishers, because they don't even, most of them don't even do randomly controlled trials. They say, why would we I kid you not, why would we spend millions of dollars on something they don't even look at? Real talk. I had one say, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Basically, we wasting our money. They don't care about results. They never ask about it. The committees don't examine it. So why do you want us to spend millions of dollars on something they don't care about? They want their social justice. They want their 3Qing. They want whatever's popping on social media. They don't ask about usability. They don't ask about learning curve. They dang sure don't ask about data. So you're talking about people having, so they're saying, you want us to impact the supply, but what about the demand? We have to demand something that has evidence of working.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we chose Seaford, because they're using something that has more evidence of students' achievement than any curriculum, bar none in the country, that most folks don't even know about.
Yeah.
Can I say something before we end?
Go ahead, man, go ahead.
Specifically to the board members, one thing that we did 3 years ago, very intentional, was to relook at our policy, every single policy that we have within the district. And every school board meeting, we have about 4 or 5 policies that they go through, and revisions are either made or we do away with them because they aged out. And so I think that also helps somewhat on the local level as far as advocacy with our educators and making sure that we are modern in our approach of what we do. So for the board members, if you can take that, Jewel.
And can I piggyback off of my colleague? I was listening as you were talking about your board meetings can pretty much not cover what the agenda is.
Right.
And Dr. D and Jeff knows that as soon as, what do I say when I get in there? I'm like, okay, we're gonna wrap this board meeting up by this time. Okay, because we're there to talk business.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about what I like, what you like, it's about business. When the board motions and approve that agenda, those are the topics we need to stick to. That is the business at hand that needs to be taken care of. Now, when you speak about data, Kelly can tell you, when they start talking about the elementary school moving up to middle school, our question is, can your data show which kids choiced to a charter school and which children stayed in our district? Because we're comparing apples and oranges. So we're constantly asking about data to show, well, how is this working? How is this better than this? And can you, desegregate the data to show us all the way down to, as you would say, the nuts and bolts? But we realize that it can't. But Dr. Jeanette is working on Cause
I'm
we asked
working
her
on
a
it.
question and she's like, no, well, I don't think we have it, but I'm gonna work on that. So, my lens is this, if those things are occurring in your district, then my question is, what is the board doing?
Yeah.
Okay, it goes back to the board. Okay, and, you know, so you can't have success for all students when you're not covering business to make them successful. So, that's my take on it. Just like my friends here from New Mexico said, and I appreciate your candidness about saying how supportive the board is. And my response was, the board hires a superintendent, why would we not support you?
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me, you know, so.
And on that note, we want to thank our guests tonight. We appreciate you, we love you. Thank you so much for your honesty, your candor, your foresight. You didn't say nothing.
She did.
She said
I-
very little.
I want her one thing. I want her
Yeah,
one
yeah,
thing.
yeah. And that'll take us out. Once you give us the one thing that they should take away, that'll take us out.
I hope that your visit today has shown you that these kids can.
Yeah.
I hope you leave here knowing that your kids can.
Yeah.
Get the right tools, get the right people, and all kids can.
All right now. Say it just for last.